Okay. Yeah. So that's actually an interesting idea, right? That in the Agile sort of mythos, it's like big bad management withholds authorization. Here, you're authorizing people, and they're slow to take it up.
Yeah.
That's an interesting concept.
It freaks them out initially because they don't believe it. I mean, we had one example where we had a team working on a re-architecture. We added a bunch of resources to it, and they came to me and said, "How would you like us to organize? Like, who you want to be on, which team?" And I said, "You are the closest to the work. You are in the best position to make the better decision here. Go figure it out. Here are the constraints I put on it, right? You can't have unbalanced teams. You can't have teams that are specializing in one thing and not another. But within that framework, you are free to self-organize." And they were like, "Really?" And I was like, "No, really."
You still withheld final decision authority, though, right?
Yes. Well, I said, come back to me and let me verify that you are living within the constraints I established, right? So
I see.
I'm fine with your decision insofar. And so they did I think a pretty cool thing. They went, they took it upon themselves to pick up their belongings, and they went to another section of the building that had been unoccupied, kind of huddled together, worked together as one large team for 2 weeks to try to get a feel for who did what meshed with kind of which person, and they kind of sorted out, and they came back to me and said, "Here's what we'd like to do." And I said, "You've met my constraints. You've got 2 balanced teams. They've got an equal mix of junior and senior people and kind of appropriate skill sets. So be it."
That's interesting. So let's talk about constraints for a minute. So coming out of the first open space, we communicated to people that any practice would be okay as long as it didn't offend the manifesto values and principles. So that formed a kind of constraint. Correct. And we did some Scrum teaching, training, and some coaching. So there was a perception that there was an investment in Scrum, and there was some pushback from that from people in the open space and afterwards. And we basically told them, as long as it's not blatantly opposing the manifesto, go do whatever's going to work within that constraint. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? Because there was sort of a messy middle, wasn't there?
Yeah. If I had to do it over again, I think I actually would have switched the ordering of things, right? So I did Scrum training for the teams first, and then we did the open space. And so I think I sent a little bit of mixed message that, we're doing Scrum here. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, what happened after the open space, people started to really grok that we were, truly letting people organize amongst themselves. And what I found that happened over time between the first and second open spaces is different teams adopted different practices, but they, again, had to maintain kind of conformance with the overall Agile manifesto. So some decided to do Kanban, some did more what I call traditional Scrum, some changed the sprint length durations. So they really did kind of organize according to what best met their needs. Mm-hmm. But I felt like if I had done it in the other way around, it would have really driven home that point sooner.
Yeah.
But I sort of think of this, as like a game, and you have to have games have to have rules.
Yeah.
And so there had to be some constraints, and again, that was about honoring the Agile manifesto and not offending its principles.
Which wasn't such a loose constraint after all, was it?
It wasn't. But again, people were free to operate within that, and so I think if I had done the training after the open space as hey, here is a particular practice that doesn't offend the manifesto that you may choose to use, it might have been a cleaner message than the way I did it, but
we did the best we could.
You live and learn.
Yeah, well, we backed into it.
Well, remember, again, I was coming from past experiences where I was prescribing the methodology, right? And so with that mindset, I said, of course we're going to do Scrum here, so let me get training scheduled.
Completely well-meaning.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's all with the best of intentions, the prescription.
Yep.
Yet it reduces the sense of control and also the belonging and being part of the authoring of the practice.
Exactly. And it drives down engagement. So we care deeply about engagement here. We actually measure it twice a year through annual employee surveys. And as you can imagine, I was anxious to get the results of the last survey to see what people were saying with the results of their scores, and very pleased to read that 90% of the dev population said they feel highly engaged or very highly engaged, which was a significant uptick over the year before, the 6 months before.
And the baseline, the bogey or the sort of quota is supposed to be 85%, right?
Well, 85 is the goal.
Not everyone gets it. That's just a goal.
There. 80 is closer to what you sort of get. Okay, you're at 80. That's a reasonably good place to be at.
So, are you saying you utterly crushed it?
I think so.
All right. Well, that's what open space is supposed
more
to do
work
for
to do. Again, the journey is not over, and that was the cool thing. Was development was highly engaged.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time recently between the second open space and the third open space, kind of extending this to include a lot of the other disciplines. Dev and QA had been a big part of it initially on, but now the user experience and the product management organization, the PMO, the tech writing organization, they are now kind of also part of this and having a hand in crafting how it works. And emboldened by the success of these organizations, other disciplines which traditionally don't adopt Agile principles like sales and marketing and our leadership team are doing a lot of the principles.
You mentioned the third open space. Let's get to that in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
For now, let's spend just a minute on what the leadership team ended up doing between the two open spaces. The leader of this organization came to me and said, she asked me, do you think it would be a good idea for my management team to take a shot at this for a month or two and see what it's actually like? We'd have a backlog, we'd do a daily meeting, and then we'd demo our results to the whole company at our monthly all-hands. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of that and your experience of it being on staff when that happened.
So this was fascinating. So, so my boss was predisposed to experimentation and open to new ideas, which helped a lot. Had seen this incredible amount of energy out of the first open space. Had seen this uptick in energy in the halls in the kind of the PD product development section of the building, and we had we were having a one-on-one one day, and she said, I really, I want to learn more about how this works, and B, what do you think about if we would adopt some of it, and that might kind of validate it? And I said, I think it's a fantastic idea. So we looped you in for some of your guidance as to how it might work in with a team that was composed of a head of sales and a head of marketing and a head of development and a head of product and a compliance officer and a few other things. And we crafted our own methodology, which was we did month-long sprints. Our boss was the product owner. So we had stories that were kind of business oriented. We had grooming sessions where we kind of put them on cards and reorder them and worked on done criteria. We had a planning meeting where we pulled the month's worth of work in. We did daily stand-ups to talk about progress against the stories, and we did a retrospective at the end of the first month, and then we did a sprint review, which in our case was an all-hands meeting.
You guys have an all-hands meeting which the entire tribe gets together for an hour and a half, and you assess the previous month and look forward to the upcoming month, and you welcome some new hires, and there's some rituals in there. And what are you saying? During the all-hands, you guys demoed your sprint review?
You got it. Yeah. So
in front of the whole group?
So the first sprint, like any new team, we probably hit 70% of the stories. I mean, the other 30%, we weren't quite done. And so people were like, well, I want to talk about them because I did all this great work in the month about this story. And I said, well, if you're going to honor the principles, we didn't really finish all the done criteria, so the story should roll over. And so we shouldn't really be talking about it. And again, my boss did a very cool and brave thing. So at the beginning of the meeting, she said, we're going to demo the stories. Here's the 10 stories the team pulled. Here's the 7 you're going to hear about today. And here's the 3 with big red X's next to them. While there was great work done, we didn't meet all the done criteria, so we're not going to talk about those, but you'll probably hear about them next month because we'll aim to finish them. And so different people got up and demoed, right? So it wasn't working software in the traditional sort of product development Scrum sense. It might have been a marketing plan or some learnings on a go-to-market strategy, or, and might be working software, right? So some of them were about kind of getting certain releases to certain stages of functionality. And my boss said, we will do this experiment for 3 months. We will do 3 sprints. At the end of the 3 sprints, as a team, we'll decide whether we want to continue it or not. So we had a retrospective we did one at the end of every month, but at the end of the 3rd month, she pulled us together and she said, do you want to keep doing this? We unanimously voted to keep doing it, and we're now on our 9th sprint.
That's beautiful.
And I've been kind of taking it to other parts of other business units within our company and talking about how we use it, and starting to get a lot of traction in other places.
I can tell you as a spectator watching that and watching the leadership team kind of stand in front of the whole tribe, kind of with, exposed, vulnerable, talking about how some stories were too big.
Yeah.
They didn't have complete done criteria. You couldn't split them. You kind of were doing little mini death marches at the end of the sprint, and explaining all that. The people that were watching this, they were elbowing each other, and they were highly entertained. And it was striking how edifying that was to the organization as a whole, who were also struggling as a group.
They felt validated. They felt like, oh my God, it's not just us, right? You go to a support group, right, and you good to hear about other people have kind of similar situations as you.
Yeah.
And so when they heard the leadership team saying, we whiffed on this done criteria, we overestimated, we had the story pointing wrong, again, people were saying, oh my God, that happened to us. It's okay as long as we learn from it, right? I thought, one other quick story if we have time. One of the very first Scrum teams we formed, in their very first sprint, pulled a bunch of stories, and they got 90% through all of them, but not 100% through any of them.
Oh, okay.
Right? So they came to me and said, what do we do? And I said, well, nothing's really done. You can't deliver business value with 90% of something done. So don't cancel the sprint review, but just get up and say, here's the story. And so, people came, I came, my boss came, and they stood up and said, we don't got much to show because here's why. And my boss said, what did you learn? Got it? What are you going to do for next steps to try to not have this happen again? But okay, you learned something. It wasn't a wasted sprint, and I think they went back expecting to be tongue lashed, and instead getting this. Okay, go forth and learn from what you did wrong, and they came back the next sprint, nailed it, right? And so I think having that culture of failure is fine as long as you fail fast and you learn something from it and you incorporate it so you don't make that same mistake again. I think it's going to be very liberating for people. And to see the leadership team do the same thing was pretty validating.
Yeah, and when the authority figures in the company, Frank, validated the failed 90% stories, right? There was a lot of storytelling triggered by that team about how things are different now than they were before.
Right.
And this is a different game.
Yeah. Again, lots of storytelling about pretty dramatic transformation in culture where, historically a little bit more traditional, right? Dev managers walk around and tell people what they're doing this day and then checking up with them and saying, did you finish it, right?
Yeah.
And teams, engineers having to come to people to ask for, is it okay to do it this way or this way? And by pushing more of the decision making down to the team and giving them more control, I hear this over and over again. They say, before I felt set up to fail. I felt like I was being told what to do, how to do it in a certain time frame, because the business needed it done this way in a certain time frame, and so I felt out of the gate it was hopeless. And by not locking all of those variables for people and giving them we have seen a dramatic increase in productivity, because out of the gate people feel like, I signed up for this. I now have my kind of personal kind of reputation on the line and my team's reputation on the line to deliver. And so that has been, I think, a big part of the culture change.
Very interesting. All right, so we're finishing up this 90-day period. We go through this messy middle. We have a couple of drop balls and fire drills.
Sure.
It's a little bit chaotic. It's not clearly defined. People are doing lots of experimentation. Some teams are doing Kanban, others are doing Scrum, others are modifying Scrum. The leadership team's doing a Scrum hybrid. We're heading into the second open space, which was about...
Value system.
Yeah, it's about 100. It was about the values of the company.
Yeah.
We do that second open space. Everyone knows what it's about. That open space is not as well attended, and the closing circle is smaller. You're at that. You opened it as the sponsor.
I did.
Tell us a story about that open space.
Yeah, so attendance was a little bit less than the first one. I think part of it was a scheduling problem. We didn't pick a day that there was a bunch of other kind of important events going on, so some folks got called away to do a bunch of prep for some big offsite that was happening shortly after that. So that was probably a scheduling snafu. But it was still, I had 100 at the first one. We probably were at 75 or 80 at the second one. This